closest to your home. It is 12:23, WABC in New York. It is now July 14th, 1977. We are now almost 3 hours into the blackout. Gus Engelman, who we have had already several reports with Ed Livingston of Con Ed as to what caused the blackout, when it will be back, has now a further report from Nassau County.
All right, George, as I said before, LOCO, which is the Long Island Lighting Company, they are trying to give electricity to Con Ed to help Con Ed perhaps restore some power in Queens. This is the spokesman from LOCO. His name is Ira Freilisher, and he's bringing us up to date on the situation, how LOCO is trying to aid Con Edison.
The earliest indication we got of trouble was a request from the power pool at about 9:09 to reduce voltage in order to help Con Ed. And then 10 minutes later, we got a request from the power pool to actually begin dropping customers. That's an emergency procedure. And we dropped about 20% of our customers in order to try to help out in the city. But then very shortly our interconnection with Con Ed became overloaded because so much power was flowing over the line. And the power pool authorized that the line be opened and we disconnect from the city. So at that time, which was about 9:25, we restored our own system to normal. And there are no problems on the LOCO system at the moment. Then the most recent thing that happened is that at 11:20 we were able to reestablish the interconnection with Con Ed. And we are beginning to pump some power into the city. And we expect to get up to a maximum of about 300 megawatts into the city, which should be able to assist in their restoration of the Queens area.
Queens area. Which means what, Ira? And essentially, in other words, how would that help restore that power?
Well, they will be getting power from the island, and Con Ed has what's known as a network system, so that they'll have to bring their territory back gradually, area by area. And I would think that what is probably happening now is that they are probably bringing back sections of Queens. But we don't know that for a fact. That's just the normal procedure.
Gus Engelman, talking with people from, now let me ask you, Gus, what does this mean? At one point he said that they were dropping customers. Does that mean that, for example, maybe some of the bigger commercial establishments, they would cut their power, that they might feed residents of Queens?
No, when they were dropping customers, they were just dropping customers' homes, residents, people, people who live in Queens. In other words, initially, by helping Con Ed, they were overloading their own lines, and they themselves were afraid of a breakdown. So therefore, they had to drop some customers to make sure that they were not becoming overloaded. Then when the situation neutralized, so to speak, when their lines were all right again, then they contacted Con Ed again, and they started feeding electricity to Con Ed again, which they're still doing, hopefully to get some lights back on in Queens.
For example, then we would want to check in with Bayside to find out, like that type area, whether or not they might be getting power from there.
That's exactly what we're doing right now.
All right. So we thank you for that, Gus Engelman, who has managed again to get people on the line and get the information for you. Whatever information there is to be gotten, we will give you as complete a story as is humanly possible. I'm George Michael on WABC 77 in New York. We have several other people that we have tracking down. As we have mentioned to you, in case you have just joined us, it is very difficult tonight to find out exactly what all is going on around the area, because all of our means of communication, that is to say all of our telephone lines, are unfortunately all lights out. So we are pushing from time to time the lights. If you are calling with something of major importance, we thank you for that, and we will do everything that is humanly possible to tell you exactly what is going on. Sandy Sanderson has just walked into the WABC newsroom with the great news that Chris Aguirre of Stations Relations is on the Hudson River having a party. Says everything's under control from there. Also said that I was doing a fine job. Of course, Chris, you see, has been on the Hudson River for several hours, and you can imagine what's happening there. Also, we want you to know that there are several other things that are happening tonight. For example, you won't believe it. You will. On WABC, it's 12:27. I'm George Michael, and I have mentioned before that the newest addition to the WABC staff is a man named Sandy Sanderson from the city of Montreal, Canada, home of the Canadians, who you may recall eliminated the Islanders, therefore we won't like Sandy at all. And he goes for bizarre things, as most most people from Montreal do, has just come in with the daily news lineup of the TV programs for today. This morning, on your television, at 3:30 in the morning on Channel 2, you will be able to watch the movie Blackout, Dana Clark. For true, that was listed before this blackout ever occurred. Only Sandy Sanderson could dig it up. There it is. It was the scheduled show for 2 o'clock in the morning. Blackout, Dana Clark. I will give you odds of 1,000,000 to 1 that we ain't going to see that tomorrow morning. Incredible. 12:28 at WABC. I'm George Michael with the entire team of WABC News correspondents, of stringers. The weatherman, the latest word we have from him is that the thunderstorms, the electrical storm, which caused this blackout, has basically passed through the area. We hope and anticipate that the weather conditions will rapidly improve, lower humidity, temperatures down to 70 by the morning, and I'm sure you won't hear Harry at 6 in the morning because he'll wake up and the clock will be a few hours behind, as yours will be. Set it now, if you will, at 12:29.
All right, George, Chuck Leonard here again. I've got a report on the part of the situation on Long Island now from our Long Island correspondent, Ed Zeidner.
While Long Island isn't directly affected anymore by the power blackout in the 5 boroughs of New York City, commuters who may try to use the Long Island Railroad during the rush hours will be. A spokesman for the Long Island Railroad says the Long Island Railroad is off the list for going into New York City in the rush hour in the morning. Reason being, they run by electricity. They had 14 trains backed up or stalled in various places when the blackout occurred. And one woman, anyway, was reported to be in a serious condition, fainting and that sort of thing, and the Long Island Railroad had to expedite that situation. Lilko says if there are any power blackouts on Long Island, if you're experiencing one on Long Island, it's not due to the major blackout in New York City. Ed Zeidner in Hempstead for WABC News.
All right, George, one other thing, I'll give it right back to you. It was brought to me to mention, and I don't see why we haven't before. We've mentioned that traffic is moving along with the aid of street corner people. Actually, we have police out there, auxiliary police are out there, volunteers are out there helping the traffic move. One problem that is getting to be sort of serious, though, pedestrians, because there are no lights, have no way to get across the streets, and they're sort of darting in and out among the cars. Please, if you're driving, I know you have your radios on, please watch out for pedestrians. They tend to stand by and look like they're not going to ever cross the street, and all of a sudden they start darting out right in front of you. So please drive carefully, slowly, and keep an eye on the curb for pedestrians.
Chuck Leonard from WABC 77 in New York. It is now 12:31 in the morning, the 14th of July, 1977. And as we've said before, the biggest question on November the 10th, 1965 was, where were you when the lights went out? Some people told the truth, some did not. One man I'll vouch for tonight, aside from myself, I was on the air at the time, playing a record, by the way, called Do You Want to Make Love, and the lights went out. I had with me in the WABC newsroom Bob Capers. Bob Capers now 3 hours and 1 minute later, bringing us up to date on the most complete information available on the blackout.
Okay, George, but before we get to that, this disturbing report from the White House this morning. There's confirmation that an American cargo helicopter has been shot down in North Korea by North Korean gunfire. No word yet on the fate of the pilot and crew. Now, presidential spokesman Jody Powell says the United States is awaiting a full explanation from the North Korean government regarding this incident. Powell also says if there was any infringement of the helicopter on North Korea's airspace, it was not intended. An American helicopter down this night by North Korean gunfire. The incident reportedly occurred about 10:20 Wednesday night, about an hour after New York City got blacked out. The incident's, of course, not related except for the time factor. Kennedy and LaGuardia airports are still closed this morning, all their traffic being detoured to Newark Airport, which is fully operative right now. And within the hour, we're told that Con Edison will push a button, activating its maze of generator units. And little by little, small distribution areas will be added to those generators. It's likely to take all of this morning and most of this afternoon to restore full service to the 5 boroughs and Westchester counties. Now, the effort continues to relieve the load on the police department's 911 emergency number. Ambulance services in several communities are on 24-hour alert, fielding emergency calls. Now, that list now includes the Glen Oaks Volunteer Ambulance Service, serving Floral Park, Oakland Gardens, Belrose, and Glen Oaks, Queens. Now their number is 347-1600, 347-1600. And the emergency number for the Corona Volunteer Ambulance Corps is 592-1068. That's 592-1068. And we can't repeat this final warning often enough. Unplug all those air conditioners and lights and other electrical outlets so that when power is restored to your home, it won't result in what Con Ed people call a surge, a sudden reactivation of all those conveniences, which could result in a power relapse. And you will know when power is actually fully restored because we here at WABC will inform you so.
All right, Bob Caper is bringing us up to date, and we will have further word for you as quickly as it becomes available to us is exactly what occurred over North Korea, and repeat and stress there is absolutely no tie-in between the two whatsoever. The unfortunate shooting down of the cargo airplane over in North Korea, and we'll have further details as soon as they become available. Bob Capers now will have to be obviously devote his attention to that. However, there are some 30 people in the WABC newsroom and in the tape rooms putting together various stories. The man who's been able to do the most good on the telephone tonight and get people to talk who really don't want to is Gus Engelman, and Gus Engelman has just completed another phone call, another conversation. It's now 12:34 WABC News Time. Gus, what can you bring us as far as late reports?
George, we had received a report earlier that there had been a fire at the Bronx House of Detention. And as you recall, or as our listeners will know, this is in the wake of two recent tragic fires also there, which of course tonight even more so a cause for alarm because we're talking about inmates, people who are locked up in the dark. And so when that blaze broke out, we had one of our street reporters, Joe Pham, check it out, and here's Joe Pham right now with his report.
It was only a small fire, and it has been put out. Most of the inmates at the Bronx House of Detention were asleep in their cells and were not aware of the fire, said a fire department spokesman. The fire was extinguished by prison guards, although the city fire department had responded, and the fire was put out by the prison's own firefighting equipment. Joe Pham, WABC News.
Joe Pham with Gus Engelman on WABC. I'm George Michael. Good morning. It's 12:35, July 14th, 1977. And where were you when the lights went out? Various people around the area. People will be asking that question for a long time. It was caused by lightning and thunderstorms in Westchester, which knocked out the Indian Point plant, which is a main generation system. Also lost was the major north-south feeder. They didn't have the exact time of the problems, however, the following occurred. Ravenwood 3, a big generator in the city and Queens, went out. They tried to save it by cutting back on the voltage. Con Ed did. They cut back 5%. That was not enough. They cut back by 8%. Another voltage reduction was still not enough. Finally, they started to shed the load into Westchester. And at 9:29:30 on WABC, the city of Manhattan and the 5 boroughs, along with Westchester County, went dark. It will be several hours at least before the power goes back on. Already 3 hours and 5 minutes into the blackout of the summer of '77. Appliances that were on should be turned off to prevent a big surge to deal with. In other words, it is important that if you had any appliances of any kind plugged in, make sure they are unplugged. As Con Ed, within the hour, expects to push a button, which will gradually, not all at once, will gradually turn sections of the city's power back on. As that power comes back on, though, in your area, it could be a surge. If you have a TV that was on and that surge comes through, you will probably lose your television. Please be sure that you have all appliances, such as air conditioners, shut on the off condition. Make sure that it is off so that all the power may distribute itself across the 5 boroughs of Manhattan and Westchester, and eventually the power will be back on. Report of an explosion at a Con Ed plant in Peekskill. Gus Engelman talked with State Trooper Walter Heafsch. He explained the situation was not serious, would not delay the restoring of power. New Yorkers have taken to the street, some in merriment, some in dance, some in party. It is a most unusual situation. For some, a festive. For some, it will, of course, be hardship. We understand that Con Ed's reporting still at least another 2-hour delay. Over 7 million people are without power. Should an emergency occur where you must have an ambulance, you dial 911 for an ambulance. Hospital officials stress only in an emergency do you dial 911. Lincoln and Holland tunnels report no major problems. However, the Midtown Tunnel is closed. Repeating, the Midtown Tunnel is closed. If you live on Long Island and you're going to try to drive home, which you've been asked not to do at this time, you'll probably have to use the Queensboro Bridge. Con Ed begs everyone turn off all appliances. LaGuardia Airport has been closed, as has Kennedy. All ingoing, outgoing traffic will be diverted to Newark Airport in New Jersey. We would suggest that you not try to pick passengers up nor to find them. Please allow them to get their own transportation and come to you. 29 million calls during 1965 in the first 6 hours went through the telephone company. The telephone company, in hopes of preventing this overload, have asked you please do not call friends, do not call neighbors, do not try to find out how the situation is in your neighborhood. Rather, let them call you if in fact it could be an emergency. West Side Highway continues to report heavy traffic. Avoid the West Side Highway. Telephone company urging you please do not use the telephone. Con Ed representatives say that they feel they will be able to start restoring power hopefully within the hour. The American Red Cross has set up emergency first aid centers at Grand Central Station and Penn Station here in the city. If you have a special emergency situation for the Red Cross, you should call their special Red Cross emergency number 787-1000. Those emergency centers are staffed with doctors and nurses at Penn Station and Grand Central Station. Chuck Leonard.
All right, George, I just have another emergency number. This will affect those people downtown in Manhattan. Anyone south of Canal Street needing emergency ambulance service can call the Beekman Downtown Hospital at 233-5300. That's extension 293. I'll give you that number again. This is anyone south of Canal Street needing emergency ambulance service. Call the Beekman Downtown Hospital at 233-5300, extension 293. That's in an emergency.
Chuck Leonard with George Michael on WABC with the entire WABC News team and all the various employees, the people who have come in to try to run the equipment. And if the engineers, as you know, of course, the NABED are on strike. We have many people who have just done an outstanding job to keep things flowing for us tonight, activating equipment that really hasn't been used, I guess, since the last power blackout in '65. I am hopeful that Sandy Sanderson will be able to find out for me what happened at Shea Stadium tonight, where the Mets were playing the Cubs, what happened with the power there, and how the people there reacted. It's something that I would really hope we can find out.
Yeah, George, I have visions of a center fielder circling under a high fly ball and the lights go out, you know. And as luck would have it, if it's one of the Cubs, he probably caught it.
All right, the Mets and the Cubs are playing at Shea, and we hope to have that report for you. Shea Stadium, we understand, was affected by the power blackout, although very near the Nassau County line. It is 20 minutes before 1 o'clock, 12:40, July 14th, 1977. A little over 3 hours ago, the city of Manhattan had it happen again. The night the lights went out in New York. It happened at 9:29 on the 13th of July. Now, 3 hours later, the reasons why are gradually coming across. Essentially, a lightning, electric storm passing through Westchester knocked out the plants, one line after another, overloads, eventual darkness in the city of New York. We'll be on the phone with various reporters, various people, bringing you up to date as to what has happened. Most importantly, the question that everyone asks, how long will it last? At this time, Con Ed says they will make every effort to, within the hour, try to start restoring some power. Whether or not they will be able to, only time will tell. There, of course, as we've said, was one minor explosion and resultant fire that turned out to not be serious, should not delay the massive restoration of power to Manhattan, but will in some areas cause it. We had reports earlier, have not had follow-up reports, that there was some restoration of power in Brooklyn. And if that should occur to you, please be generous. Do not have appliances on. We repeat that if you are going to use kerosene or gas lanterns, be sure that, number one, they are clean on the outside. Number two, if you are going to use that type of fuel, make sure you put it on a flat surface, one which will not burn before you light it. There is nothing will go faster than a gas lantern which is overloaded. It could happen to you, so please avoid it. Should you need emergency assistance tonight, the number to dial is 911. If you are a policeman who is just waking up, you're on WABC in New York, where we have had a massive power failure. Commissioner Michael Codd has told all off-duty police officers, report to the precinct nearest you, not to your precinct, the one to which you are normally assigned, but rather the one nearest you. The weatherman calling for clear weather tonight, less humid. we should say now this morning. Once the storm has passed through and there are still areas reporting some lightning. It will become clear, less humid, sunny for tomorrow. Our low tonight of 70, a high tomorrow of 90. It's now 84 degrees on WABC in New York at 12:42.
Okay, George, Chuck Leonard here again. That low humidity may be a blessing in disguise because I'm sure that many New Yorkers are trying to spend the night without virtue of air conditioning. In fact, all New Yorkers at this particular point. And sleeping may be a little tough. The humidity level going down will help quite a bit. Again, we would like to stress, don't drive if you don't have to. If you are driving, please watch out for pedestrians because there are no traffic signals. They get a little confused. It's like it disorients your entire life when you get to a street corner and the street light is not working. They have a tendency to want to dart out into the traffic. Please drive carefully. For your own safety, drive carefully because the cross streets and the main drags are having a little trouble merging with each other, and I've seen a few near accidents. We haven't had any reports of any serious accidents in the metropolitan area, but I'm sure there have been a lot of fender benders going on, and in general, New Yorkers are getting off the streets at this point, many of them at their local watering hole. It's amusing, George, that whereas this is a crisis situation, and it's a very serious situation for many, many New Yorkers are more worried about their chicken defrosting in their freezer at this particular point than anything else. We have a lovely young lady running the board for us right now, and she's saying when she gets off the board, she's got to go home and cook because her chicken has defrosted. That's an interesting side of it.
I wish that Dan Ingram were here so that, and Dan, by the way, called in a little while ago from Oyster Bay to recount for us his harrowing drive home as he was going across the 59th Street Bridge when the power blackout occurred and all the lightning that he could see in the sky. No one can tell chicken stories like Dan Ingram about Neil Sedaka. Neil Sedaka, you all are aware of that story, went on vacation and had bought some the humongous, this is a true story, a humongous freezer, and had put several hundred chickens, which he bought on special, in the freezer. He went on vacation, and when he came back a month later, not knowing that his freezer had lost its power for almost 30 days, I don't need to tell you what happened when he opened the door. Dan Ingram tells the story much better than I being George Michael at 12:44. WABC News Time, it's 12:44 exact if you wish to set your clock. Commissioner Michael Codd, as we have mentioned before, urging all policemen to report to your precinct nearest your home as quickly as is possible. American Red Cross set up emergency first aid centers at Grand Central Station and Penn Station in New York. Anyone having special emergency situations for the Red Cross can call the Special Red Cross emergency number 787-1000. These emergency centers are staffed with doctors and nurses at Penn Station and Grand Central. We had reports from Doctors Hospital of the nurses, the many aides staying over to help the many patients without lights in their room, but their emergency power, their backup generators were on. No emergencies were unable to be handled. They were able to handle all that they could get at that time. Gus Engelman is the man who has been able to secure most of the people on the WABC News phone, and when it comes time for awards at the end of 1977, I'm sure that this will be a night that should produce many, but anybody that can raise as many people in the know as Gus Engelman has been able to do tonight has to come in for some kind of award. I don't know how you do it, Gus, but I know you do it. Who do we have now?
George, a lot of our listeners must be wondering, since power is knocked out all over this town, how come the phones are in operation? In other words, how come the phones were not affected? And therefore, I spoke with Harriet Norris. She works for Ma Bell. I just got off the phone with her, and she tells us why.
Well, we do use power for our phones, but what we have done is we've turned everything over to emergency power, which is generated by our own diesels that are located in our own central office buildings. So we're still in operation, and we will be throughout this blackout.
No parts of the city then are affected as far as phones being out?
No phones are out in any part of the city. The only problem that we are having is that some customers are experiencing a delay in getting the dial tone.
Harriet, most important, because since everybody and his brother is using this phone tonight, or their phones tonight because of the emergency situation, any possibility that phones could be knocked out? And what are you telling your customers?
Okay, the system will not be knocked out. We're monitoring it very carefully in our headquarters, but what we want to urge our customers to do is not to use the phones unless it's an emergency. And even if they do use the phones for those emergencies, to keep their messages very brief and get off the phone so someone else can use it for their problem.
Gus Engelman talking with Ma Bell, the telephone company, reporting that you please stay off. I don't know if you were aware of this, Gus, but in 1965, during the first 6 hours of the blackout, the phone company told us tonight that they handled more than 29 million phone calls. That means that we have some 7 million people affected tonight. That would be 4 calls per person. So if you will just please not make your calls, we'll be able to avoid this. 29 million calls in the first 6 hours of the blackout of 1965. Surely we can do better than that.
Well, George, you know, anytime the telephone company tells you not to use the telephone, it is an emergency. They make their money when you use the telephone.
There'll be no dialing in to find out what the scores were tonight. Telephone company says don't use the phones unless absolutely necessary. Gentlemen suggest you wait until tomorrow to call your friends and say, where were you when the lights went out? If they were at home, fine. If they were in Midtown Manhattan or maybe somewhere on 2nd, 1st, or 3rd, or the Village, you know they aren't going to tell you really they really were or what they really did. It's 12:47 on WABC. I'm George Michael with the entire WABC News team. Chuck Leonard standing by, Steve O'Brien, Bob Cruz also with us, and we, of course, have Gus Engelman, Bob Capers, Paul Ehrlich, Glenn Morgan, Sandy Sanderson, and all the people who are helping behind the scenes. Jackie Grubman, who is not behind the scenes but is doing a super job of keeping things organized tonight. New Yorkers are directing traffic in Midtown Manhattan, and you may have driven by a corner like 54th and 6th where the traffic always seems to back up, and you said, thank Lord I'm not a policeman here. Tonight someone became a policeman, someone who was just a citizen, put on a white jacket, went to the corner and started directing traffic. You knew that the blackout had hit, and you knew that New Yorkers were going to respond, as New Yorkers always seem to do. The much maligned city of so many various peoples from all walks of life have but one thing in common tonight. What happened? Where were you when the lights went out? So the common denominator is that everyone will say, I was here, I was there. And the next question they'll say is, when will the lights come on? We're advised by Con Ed that the lights will probably not be on for some time. They're going to try to restore power, hopefully, in some areas on small degrees within the hour. We have reports from Con Ed that it will be a couple of hours before you're going to see a true lights up in the city. Over 7 million people are without power. A lightning and thunderstorm passed over Westchester shortly after 9 p.m. The result? New York had another blackout. They said it couldn't happen, but it has happened. It happened at 9:29:30 on the 13th of July, 1977. It is now 12:48 in the morning.
Well, George, you know, one of the really big problems that could evolve from this is that if they don't restore power in Manhattan and the surrounding boroughs by rush hour tomorrow morning, then what happens? I mean, the traffic signals are not operative now. The air conditioners in these big buildings, as we sit in our sauna bath studio, we're beginning to find out the air conditioners are not working. It could be a very curious morning. It's even a curious night. You go down the street level right now, and it's like ghost town. It's very eerie. The lights in the Hilton Hotel and the surrounding places, they're just not on. And you feel like maybe I've stepped into the wrong world or something. I'm in the twilight zone. Strange night in New York City. Again, crisis, emergency, all of that. People responding very well. But the kind of things, the helplessness you have. I mean, we just sit here, we wait for something to happen, we get rays of hope here and there, but as far as most New Yorkers are concerned, nothing is happening now. It's just dark where they are, and it's been dark for several hours, and we just hope it does clear up before morning rush. You have something there?
It's 12:50 in the morning on WABC, July 14th, 1977, some 3 hours plus since the lights went out in Manhattan. The power failure, which has struck some 7 million people, is total. That is to say that there has been no restoration of power anywhere in the area. One of the men behind the scenes has been Sandy Sanderson. I've talked with him before on WABC, or mentioned his name anyway. Let me find out what's happening, as Sandy is one of the many people working the phones here at WABC. 2 questions. First of all, why do you just tell me the Cubs are winning 2-1? I don't need to know that the Cubs are winning. I want the Mets to beat the Cubs. You know, that's important to me.
I'll tell you whatever you want to know, George.
I want to know what happened to 20,000 people at Shea Stadium when the lights went out.
We got a couple of calls from people. You mentioned it on the air, obviously. I get a couple of calls from people saying that it wasn't too bad, that everything stopped very suddenly, and then the organist played, that there was a backup power for the organist, and he made an announcement saying, please leave, take it easy, and it wasn't a big deal.
Oh, no.
Your team lost, and it wasn't a big deal, so
I mean, they got a complete game in, Sandy.
No,
bottom of the
I can
sixth.
tell you right now, that will not be a complete game. It was bottom of the sixth, Cubs leading 2-1 at the time, and I guarantee you, knowing the Mets and M. Donald Grant, they will make sure that Chub Feeney sees to it that that game gets completed. They lost, I should tell you, by the way, they did lose that game to the San Francisco Giants. The one they were losing, they withdrew their protest, so the Mets picked up a loss in the loss column today. That was already occurred. They gave up on that protest. This one, they will not give up on. Sandy, you've been on the phone talking to people. What has it been like? What is their general feeling? What kind of feelings do you get from the people that you've been talking with?
They're in pretty good spirits, and they're all pretty positive. And I was expecting the people to call up and say, my uncle could be in an elevator somewhere near Wall Street. Can you check it out for me? But what's really happened is that people have been giving information, and especially the local ambulance people are calling up, giving their numbers. Co-ops are calling up, giving their numbers if there are any problems, and we're getting a lot of officials calling up, helping us out, and it's been great. The phones have been going crazy, and so have the people back there, but it's been a good night, and I've enjoyed it.
Before I let you go, I would like to ask you about the lady from Queens who called in about the power failure that the story, of course, which we had on for you. Lady who said that they had this power failure you maybe recall the story in the midst of my papers here.
No, I think you're just making it up. It was 1973, and she was saying that everyone's talking about November, 9th, 1965. And it was 8 hours, I believe. Manhattan was off for 8 hours. She said that in Queens and she thought parts of Brooklyn, things were off for 4 days. And that was the big time for her. And she's wondering why everybody's going back to the 65. And stressing the fact that this is the positive thing coming through with these people. They're not complaining. They're saying, well, we made it for 4 days last time. We got through 4 days. We can live with it. We can do it again. No problem.
Sandy Sanderson, everybody, one of the many people behind the scenes, trying to bring you the story, the human and the, of course, factual side of it, all on WABC 77 in New York. I'm George Michael. It's 12:53. WABC News Director Paul Ehrlich, whose greatest desire was to get on the air. His day has arrived.
Alas and alack, that's true, and my night has arrived, I might say. George, New Yorkers have been conditioned to call 911 when they have an emergency. You'll hear recorded messages, you'll see it in the paper. People are always telling you if you have a real serious problem, call 911. They also tell you, the police and the fire people will tell you, don't call 911 unless it is a serious problem. Well, on a night like tonight, you might imagine there are many serious problems. I wanted to find out how 911 was doing. I knew it was going to be busy, and I did hazard a call just to find out what would happen. In fact, I called twice. First time, 7 rings. The second time, 6 rings before there was an answer. Now, that's a 30-second wait right off. Then, there was no answer. There was a recorded message, a voice saying, please, if you do not have an emergency, call your local precinct and get off the phone. If you do have an emergency, stick with us through this announcement and an operator will pick you up. Well, the first time I did this, no operator picked me up. The line was disconnected. The second time, I waited 1 minute and an operator did pick me up and was ready to take my message. Now, it's a fairly long wait, and that it's indicative of that message. Don't call 911 unless you have to. What do you do if you have a serious problem and you can't get through 911? There are a couple of things you can do if you have the presence of mind to do it. If you have a phone book handy, and if you've got a candle so you can see that phone book, remember the phones are working. You can look, whatever borough you're in, look under New York City. Look under, when you find New York City, look for fire. The first thing you'll see when you find fire, if you have that presence of mind, is to report a fire, whatever borough you're in, and then there'll be a number. That number most likely is a lot less busy than 911. You'll also find, you can also look for police and find your precinct. Those precincts are listed one after the other. You can find the precinct nearest you. So call 911 if you have to. They do encourage you to call 911 if it's a serious emergency. If it is not, go the other route.
Paul Early, normally behind the scenes WABC News Director. Good morning, I'm George Michael. It's 12:55. The day the lights went out in New York became the night, and the night now becomes the morning. We're now 3.5 hours into the biggest power failure in the history of Manhattan, or it is at least similar to what we had in 1965. I should not say the biggest, because in 65 it was more than just the 5 boroughs. Tonight, 5 boroughs plus Westchester. Many problems. Finding out what happened, how it happened, and when it will all be corrected. One of the men doing it behind the scenes, Gus Engelman.
George, this is on a light note. I just got off the phone with a Steve Salters, who is from Illinois. First time ever in New York City. Just arrived today. His biggest wish ever, he wanted to see a Mets game. And he went out to Shea Stadium tonight, and I just got off the phone with him. I wanted to find out what happened at that ballpark, the Big Shea.
What happened at the moment the lights went out at Shea?
Well, as I recall, Ray Burris was standing on the mound holding the ball. Nobody got hurt or anything, and everybody just kind of had a big party.
What do you mean by a big party?
Well, the organist was playing, everybody was singing, dancing in the aisle, just having a good time in general. Some of the Mets infielders went through a routine with an invisible ball, an infield routine, and everybody just kind of waited to see what was going to happen.
Any panic? Were people trying to get out of the park?
Most people just stayed around to see what was going to happen.
What was the score at the time?
2-1 Cubs.
You have to come in. You all want to tell me it's 2-1 Cubs and drive me nuts, don't you? Gus Engelman with a lighter side. To those of you who were at Shea, you know, we really don't realize that. You know, and I know this to be true, and Bob Capers will verify this. We who are in the sports and news world, we take these things for granted. You know, Gus Engelman goes out there and he talks with Billy Martin or whoever. It's a matter of routine. I mean, I mentioned Billy Martin because I know that he and Billy are such good friends. And it's a matter of routine. But, you know, to the people that don't get to the ball game all that often, this may have been a big night, the night they've been looking forward to, and it costs a lot of money. And so those of you who were there, you know you were at a most historic event. It is now 12:57, WABC News Time. I am George Michael, along with all of the people of WABC, welcoming you to Blackout City, 1977. At 9:30, 9:29, that's when it happened, and one of the men who was with us was Bob Capers.
Incidentally, George, there were 20,000 people out at Shea Stadium last night during the course of that ball game. On a more serious note, President Carter and the American people still awaiting word about the crew members aboard a cargo helicopter which was shot down over North Korea last night about 10:20. The copter reportedly brought down by North Korean gunfire in the area of the demilitarized zone that separates North and South Korea. Still no word on the fate of the helicopter's crew or its mission. As you know, the president recently ordered the gradual removal of some 33,000 American troops from South Korea, an order which has not set well with that country's government or the nation of Japan. Presidential News Secretary Jody Powell says the United States has asked North Korea for a full accounting of the incident, and if the copter crew survived the incident, North Korea is being asked to treat them well and return them to this country as soon as possible. And Jody Powell says if the copter invaded North Korea's airspace, it was done so by accident and not intent. As for the New York City blackout, more than 300 arrests in Manhattan and Brooklyn alone for looting since the blackout's inception. And WABC News can now confirm reports that inmates tonight set several mattress fires inside the Bronx House of Detention. The fire department responded quickly, and all those mattress fires are out or under control. We can also confirm that earlier rumors that some inmates at the Bronx house had gotten loose and taken hostages was unfounded. No truth to it. We should be getting a more detailed explanation later this morning from Corrections Commissioner Ben Malcolm. And a warning from the city's Water Resources Department, particularly for residents of high-rise apartments throughout the city. Don't use the water unless absolutely necessary. The electric pumps which power high-rise water are still out as a result of the blackout. And the most immediate relief from the blackout comes at exactly 5:37 this morning. That's when the sun is scheduled to rise. New York City cab drivers ordered by the taxi and limo service to accommodate group rides for the duration of the outage. And WABC News has learned that the vast majority of burglar alarm systems in the city are operational, being wired on emergency power. All banks, vaults, and other high-security establishments are protected, with security firms responding to alarms as usual with armed guards. And a final note, anyone south of Canal Street needing emergency ambulance service, that's south of Canal Street, they can call the Beekman Downtown Hospital at 233-5300, extension 293. That's 233-5300, extension 293, Beekman Downtown Hospital for emergency services for anyone south of Canal Street.
It's 1 o'clock in the morning on WABC in New York. Bob, before you go away, because we've filled the people with so many things about the situation regarding the power failure and whatnot, it almost boggles the mind, and I'm going to impose on you, if you would, to just recap that story, if you could, about in North Korea, because everybody that's walked in the studio has first said, when's the lights going to come on, and secondly, what happened in Korea?
Okay, the word from the White House is that at approximately 10:20 last night, an American cargo helicopter flying somewhere between North and South Korea, that demilitarized zone which separates that particular country, was shot down by gunfire from North Korean guns. Now, we have no immediate word on the fate of the pilot and crew of that helicopter, but Presidential News Secretary Jody Powell says the president has asked North Korea to give this country a full accounting of the incident, and that if those crew people survive this mishap, that they be treated well and returned to the United States immediately. And it's also being said that if there was in any way, shape, or form an invasion on the part of the American helicopter of North Korea's sacred air territory, that it was inadvertent, it was an accident, and it was not done on purpose. But the important thing is we do not know the fate of the crew people aboard that helicopter which went down over North Korea late last night.
You had also on, Bob, about an hour ago, I believe, had some report regarding Mayor Beam with the blackout meeting. Any progress, any reports, any words at all as far as that?
Nothing other than the fact that Mayor Beam says he has been reassured by Con Edison and by the upstate power people that sometime within the next hour or two, there will be a slow, methodical, systematic return to power. It's going to be done in bits and pieces and small stages, and it will probably take all of this morning and most of this afternoon to get the 5 boroughs in Westchester County back into full power activity.
All right, and one last question before I let you go, Bob. Has there been any other word as far as from Washington regarding this power failure, the ability there to, what the aid? Has there been any requests or anything? You've heard it all out of Washington regarding this tonight.
No, nothing at all. It seems that Washington is, at the moment, is quite content with New York City and New York State's ability to deal with this immediate situation. And I suspect that if Mayor Beam runs into any problems, he in turn would contact Governor Carey, and Governor Carey would get on the hotline to President Carter to ask for additional aid. But as of now, we here in New York City seem to be able to hold our own during this crisis.
Bob Capers, WABC News. It is now 4 minutes past the hour of 1 o'clock in the morning. I'm George Michael with Chuck Leonard, the entire WABC News team, keeping you abreast. As you are probably well aware, massive power failure has completely darkened the 5 boroughs of Manhattan, Westchester County. Lightning, electrical storm moving across Westchester shortly after 9 o'clock. Knocked out one by one the generators. They cut back by 5%, did Con Ed. Then a voltage reduction of 8%. They could not stop the failure that occurred, and all the boroughs are without power at this time. One of the men who's been so much on the forefront of it all, Gus Engelman.
George, all the top brass in this town have been converging upon Manhattan Police Headquarters to deal with this situation. WABC newsman Tom Romano was dispatched to Manhattan Police Headquarters and just filed this report.
This is where I understand Mayor Beam, Police Commissioner Cart, and all of the various department heads, water resources and so forth, are together. They're in a room together. Most of the reporters are here on the outside, and we really don't know what's going on. I understand that there may be a news conference within the half hour. I must say that coming down here from I came down Broadway from 40th Street and 2nd Avenue. I cut over to Broadway and straight down Broadway, and it is a very, very hairy ride in the dark. But I must say, if they are auxiliary cops at the various tough corners like the ones on 42nd Street, they are doing a most wonderful job, and the people are obeying them there. I didn't see any accidents at all. There were a few close calls, of course. Some pedestrians are running across the street without flashing any lights or anything. And
Tom, excuse me for interrupting, Tom. We know already that Mayor Beam has declared a state of emergency, but you're down there with him now. He's been conferring with all the top brass. Have any special directives come out so far concerning the situation, what people should do and what's happening in the city?
No, not yet. There has been no special directives at all. In fact, the only thing that I have right now is I can give you a number of living arrests. Apparently, all New Yorkers aren't as great as we think they are. The numbers are as follows: Manhattan, 149; the Bronx, 150; Brooklyn, 10; Staten Island, 0; and Queens, 0. Now, those are looting arrests. That amounts to 309 looting arrests so far. That is as of 1 o'clock. That's right up to the minute. But as far as any news is concerned, as I say, the word is down here that they are all conferring, and within the half hour or the hour or whatever, it's one of those stakeout jobs where we don't know what's going on until we are told, and there isn't even any rumor out tonight.
Tom Romano, WABC News, on the phone with Gus Engelman. It's 1:06 in the morning. I'm George Michael on WABC, the 14th of July, 1977, the morning of the power blackout. Massive power failure hit the 5 boroughs of Manhattan. Westchester, it occurred at 9:30, July 13th. Tomorrow, the most asked question, much like November the 9th of 1965, will be, where were you when the lights went out? Earlier tonight, there was a young man on the phone speaking with Gus Engelman. Ed Livingston from Con Ed recounts now for us with Gus Engelman actually what happened. You've got it in machine 2.
Ed, what caused this?
We had severe lightning and thunderstorms in Westchester County, and they knocked out Indian Point 3, which is one of the generating stations on the system. And at that time, we also lost a major north-south feeder into the system, which connects us to the north. And shortly thereafter, Gus, I give you these events in sequence. I don't have exact times for them. We lost Ravenswood 3, which is a big generator in the city, in Queens. And we tried to save the system by going into a 5% voltage reduction. We went into an 8% voltage reduction, and we started to shed load in Westchester.
Ed, most important, are you people able to determine right now when power will go back on?
No, we don't have a fix. It'll be several hours, I'm sure. And what we're asking people to do is to make sure that the appliances that were on when the problem happened.
Closest